Hi, this is Dr. Rodney Davis. I'm an associate professor at Troy University. Welcome to my office at the university. I'm so happy to be with you at the Conference on Decision Making in Quirino. I've been there myself a few years ago. Really enjoyed visiting with school leaders there that were preparing to take a principal's exam. Enjoyed conducting a workshop on action research. But today I'm not going to be talking about action research. I'm going to be talking about decision making. And actually this week you've already heard several fine speakers address this topic from various perspectives. What I want to do in the few minutes that I have with you is to talk about ethical decision making. This is different than just making decisions. This really focuses in on how do we make the right decision. And that's the subtitle of my presentation, Making the Right Decision at the Right Time. And so we're going to explore this topic of ethics and how that impacts our decision making. I have a presentation that I want you to watch as I talk about it with you. So here you see a little video at the beginning, and then we're going to switch from this view to the actual presentation itself. You'll hear me talking in the background, and then we'll end up with another video of me kind of closing out our time together. I hope that your time in Quirino has been profitable so far. And I know that if you have had any chance to talk to Dr. Esperone or any of the other team members with PPLVD, you know that they have provided a wonderful conference for you. They have worked very, very hard to bring this there to you, and I hope it's been beneficial to you. You can contact me at the end of the presentation. I'll give you those links as to how to do that. And of course, if you want to take pictures with me and yourself for documentation purposes, certainly feel free to do that. You can take pictures of the video if you would like. That's absolutely fine. Now, you're going to get a copy of this video if you will bring your flash drive and give it to Diego. He will make sure you get a copy of it. So let's go ahead and get started with this very, very short session looking at ethical decision making, making the right decision at the right time, and really for the right reason. Okay, let's turn the camera over so that you can see my presentation, and you'll see now on this title slide, the title of the presentation is The Ethical Decision Maker, How to Make the Right Decision for the Right Reason. And again, my name is Dr. Rodney Davis, and I'm an associate professor at Troy University. So let's get into this presentation a little bit more deeply now. Notice that we're not going to cover a lot about other decision-making models. At the beginning, I want to give you just a brief review of what some of the fine presenters have already told you about, which is how to make decisions. And then we'll get into how to make those ethical decisions, which are a little bit different. There are actually 6 models of decision making that I'm going to address in this presentation. Basically, all I'm doing is just giving you a highlight on them, and then we'll get into what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation, ethical decision making. The first model that is often used in schools gets its name from what many principals do, and that is administrate. It's called the administrative decision-making model. When we think of this model, we realize, first of all, that it is considered a rational model, which means that it is basically logical. It has a systems approach to how to solve a problem or make a decision. And therefore, there are sequential steps to be followed in order to get through this model to make the decision. This model works great in conditions where there's a high degree of uncertainty, which means there's a lot of change, and that certainly describes many, many schools today. Thirdly, what happens in an administrative model is that we don't consider a wide range of options. We look for the most logical options that appear to resolve the issue in the quickest, most efficient way. Efficiency is the driving force of this model. We don't want to take a lot of time, do a lot of research. We have other things to get into as administrators, so this model really helps us to narrow our focus down to one or two potential solutions, potential decisions, and then to focus on the best one. And really the motto of the administrative model is that we settle for good enough. We're not looking for perfection, we're just looking to basically get by. We'll settle for what works. It may not be perfect, may not even be pretty, but it's good enough, as they say here in the United States, good enough for government work. In other words, we're not looking for high end here. We're looking for just a patch that will get us through to the next moment, the next crisis, or whatever. The second model is called the classical decision-making model, and it too is a rational or logical model, but what it does is it functions on the idea that the chain of command should be used to make decisions. And in that chain of command, the person that has the greatest expertise, has the greatest amount of authority possibly, and that may not always be the same person, but that person who is at the level where the decision needs to be made should make the decision. So if a manager should make the decision, then they are the best person to make that decision. And it's logical that if it's a manager that needs to make it, that a manager make that decision. So it is bureaucratic in its focus. And the decision gets made not necessarily by the best person to make it who is the closest to the problem or the issue. It is the person who has that title that is over that area that needs to make the decision. The underlying assumption of this model is that managers are logical and that they will make decisions which are in the best interest of the organization. And really, one realizes that it's not possible to obtain complete information, so we oftentimes have to make decisions with maybe not as much information as we like. And so in this model, when we don't have as much information as we would like, then we must default to the person to make that decision who is in a position where that decision needs to be made. The third model that we're going to talk about is called a muddling model. Probably the more accurate way to describe it would be it's the trial and error model. It is not logical / rational. It is incremental. In other words, we try things, and we're not necessarily trying things that would make logical sense, that they make sense at all. We try small steps, we make small changes, and hope that will give us more information and give us an indication that we're on the right track to resolving the problem. It is opposition defined, which means the more problems we have with the implementation of the decision, the more feedback that we get from the constituents that's negative, the slower we're going to go, and consider that we may be on the wrong track. And then if that's the case, we must try something different. And so if there's a lot of feedback, static opposition from people as you're making these decisions, then someone who follows the muddling decision-making model would say, oh, then I need to stop, I need to reevaluate, and possibly choose a different option. And for that reason, it is considered an inefficient model for really anyone in a condition of uncertainty, in a place that is riddled with high degrees of uncertainty. This model is inefficient because it makes the leader appear weak. The followers look at you and say, well, you don't know what you're doing because you're trying one thing and you're trying something else. And so this is not a great model to follow, although usually leaders who are new in their position, who maybe don't have as many qualifications as some of their subordinates, or they've been transferred from another area and they now have new responsibilities. Many of them default to this type of decision-making model because they have some apprehension and are maybe afraid to make a mistake. But using this model will tell their followers that they really don't know what they're doing. And so this is one of those times when you really don't want to use this particular model, although it is a model that is often used. Model number 4 is called a mixed scanning decision-making model, and it is rational in that it takes what we get from the incremental model, maybe what someone might consider to be a strength of the muddling model, and also it joins it to an administrative decision-making model where we have a more logical approach. We look at the objectives and we evaluate objectives to make sure that we are on the right course. Yet it is a cautious model. In other words, we're not just rushing in to make a decision. We're analyzing the situation, and then we're taking those small steps. Again, this particular model tries to overcome some of the weaknesses of the muddling model, the trial and error model, but in many cases, the mixed scanning model has weaknesses that really detract from it. Yes, it does have a logical approach, and it does have a plan, and there is an analysis, but it can also be viewed as a inefficient model for what an administrator or a leader would need to do. It does work well in times of uncertainty. It's better than the trial and error model for new leaders because it does require us to analyze the situation and to develop some objectives that can be measured or evaluated. The 5th model that we'll look at is called the garbage can decision-making model. Some have said that it is not really a model of decision-making because it is completely irrational in its approach to making a decision. The way the model works is basically you have 2 bins. I call them garbage cans, but you can call them whatever you want, a bin. And in one bin, you group all of your problems or your opportunities. You just put them in the bin. You label them, put them in the bin. The other bin, you put all of your solutions that you can think of. Not necessarily solutions that are tied to a problem, just ideas of things you would like to do. Solutions to potential problems, let's call it. You write those down, you put them in the other bin. And then what you do with this particular model is you take a problem from one bin and then you randomly take a solution to the other bin and see if they match. If they don't match, you throw one out and you put another one in. Sometimes you will see administrators that will use this particular decision-making model when it comes to new programs. And what they will do is they will take an idea that they picked up at a training seminar or a conference or whatever, a book they read even, and they will implement something in their school to fix a problem that they may not even have. In other words, they may not have an issue where students are struggling to learn to read, but yet they have implemented a reading program that they heard about at a curriculum and everybody raved about, and so they're going to bring it to their school and implement it. And unfortunately, when they do that, many of these programs don't work like they are intended to work because the problem may not exist in the school where they're being implemented, or they're not being adequately implemented. So this particular model is highly inefficient because you're solving problems that may or may not exist, and that really means that you're not creating a valid decision-making model. It's all based on what you draw out of the solution bin. And it may not even be if it is a problem and it's a solution to a problem you have, it may not be a high priority problem, because it is very random in how you pull them out. So this fifth one is not really a decision-making model, but oftentimes gets viewed as a model because of the way it's used in schools. The sixth model is called the political decision-making model. It too is irrational. It's random in how it goes, because the way the political model functions is all decisions are vetted or evaluated on their basis to increase the power or authority of the leader and increase his control over the organization. So one might say that decisions are made or motivated by self-interest. How I decide this particular decision is based on how this is going to help me, the leader. And it's random in that one time I may make a decision in favor of teacher A because that suits me, that helps me, but in a similar situation I might decide in favor of teacher B because that person can help me more, and I can gain more power or control. So it all functions around the idea of the acquisition of power. Now you may say this is not a decision-making model. You're correct. It isn't. It isn't a wise way to lead an organization, but it is out there. We see it in government. Yes, we see it in politics, and yet we need to be aware of it because, again, it can impact how we do our jobs as teachers and as leaders. And so I make you aware that this is a model that some leaders, some teachers use to help themselves increase their control and their power. It's not the way that I think an ethical leader should behave. Well, I've used the term decision-making model, and in this presentation I thought it important to maybe define what a good decision-making model or a good decision is, because we've just viewed briefly 6 decision-making models, and really when we're looking at these models and using models or making decisions, we tend to go to 2 extremes. Either it's good or it's bad. Either decision is good or the decision is bad. And we constantly think about, well, what makes a decision good? What makes a decision bad? Is it just the perspective of the person who has to live with the decision, person has to make the decision? Well, I think there are 2 ways we can look at this, and I've actually used a different word. Rather than good versus bad, I use the term right decision, the phrase right decision, and the right time. A decision is efficient, it's effective, it's good, for lack of a better word, when it is the right decision to make. In other words, it is an appropriate decision, that it resolves the conflict, or it deals with the issue that is there between the 2 teachers. It helps the organization. But secondly, it has to be at the right time. We can make decisions many times and in many ways, but the decision has to be at the exact moment that it needs to be made. We make a decision too early, we can cause more problems. We wait too long, and we can make the problem even worse. So a A good decision is one that it's the right decision, and then secondly, it's at the right time. Well, here's another point that often gets addressed when I talk about ethical decisions. I've used the term right decision, right time. And so let's define what I mean by right. And I look at this in three different ways. I look at this from the perspective of the right decision, the right time, and for the right reason. So the right decision, it's a decision that resolves, it corrects, it fixes something. The decision is also fair. In other words, to all people concerned, that no one person is getting the advantage. The decision is logical, and it's also a righteous decision. It's a moral decision. You've just heard the Byrds sing just a few seconds of their famous song, Turn, 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 because that underscores the idea that a decision has to be made at the right time. Again, I've already addressed the fact that too early can cause problems. Too late can also cause problems. We can be perceived as a procrastinator if we constantly wait to make decisions and hope that they resolve themselves. Or we might even be considered impetuous, which means that we're rushing in when we need to take some time to reflect. And then finally, we need to make decisions for the right reason. In other words, our decision needs to be aligned with a particular code of ethics, a particular professional standard, or even a religious code of ethics. And in the next slide, we'll take a look at what that code might look like. I've identified three categories of codes of ethics. The first one is a personal code of ethics. It's a man in the mirror type code. When I look at the man in the mirror, what kind of man do I want to be? What kind of man do I want to see reflected in that mirror's image? Now, personal codes of ethics are great to have, and I encourage everyone to define his or her own code of ethics. The challenge with them is that everybody can have one, and they're variable, and they're not always something that we all agree on. We all have different codes that we follow, and that can cause challenges in organizations so bureaucratic as schools. The authority that governs the personal code of ethics, of course, is the individual. That self-determination that says, I am going to set what I believe and how I'm going to live, and this is the way that life is going to be lived. Certainly, a personal code of ethics is voluntary. You can change it at will whenever you want. Professions have codes. That's what we call them, professional codes. Teachers have a code, and there's a fine one in the Philippines. Administrators have a code of professional ethics. Lawyers and doctors and ministers also have them. And so professional codes have been delineated or defined by members of that profession. They're pretty static, which means that they don't change very often. But lawyers define the code of ethics for lawyers. And in their case, lawyers determine when other lawyers have violated that code. And in a professional code of ethics, it can be a governmental regulation or authority, but most often the professional code of ethics could be the profession itself that also governs it. Now, I've indicated here that it's the state, but in the terms of doctors and lawyers, certainly the medical association or the attorneys association, the law association, would certainly create that code and hold its members to it. The professional code of ethics is a binding code. In other words, if you're going to be a member of that profession and you're going to exercise that profession, then you have to live by its code. Finally, there is a religious code of ethics. I've got a picture of Charlton Heston here holding the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments. And that's just a visual image that I want you to think about. Whether Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, there are certain codes that are outlined in those 3 major religions. For Christians and Jews, the 10 Commandments is a code of ethics. It is a set of rules or standards, we could even use the term standards, that guide how people are supposed to live, and in our analogy of a school leader, how they're supposed to act. And so a religious code of ethics is also very static. Those don't change because the authority for them is God Himself, and so we don't change those standards at all, or even the interpretation of them. 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments. Or whatever the governing codes would be for the religion, that is the standard by which members of that religion should behave, or the members of the clergy should carry out their duties. It also is a binding contract with the members of that religion. If you're going to be a Christian, then there are certain things you must live by in order to call yourself a Christian, in order to be a person in right standing, to be righteous. There's that code. And that's true with each of these others. It's all about right standing. And if you're going to be in good standing with the other school leaders, you follow the code. If you're going to have a personal code, then you need to follow it in order to be a person of integrity, a person in right standing with himself. An excellent question, I think, that needs to be asked at this point is, so how do we make right decisions? Because that's what this whole presentation is about. Well, I heard this said once that we learn to make the right decision by making bad decisions, and hopefully learning from those bad decisions. You see, decision making is a skill. It's not an ability, which means that it is something that can be learned. We can learn to be a better decision maker by learning about how to make decisions. This workshop that you're at, this seminar that you're at, certainly is going to help you to be a better decision maker. But also by practice, because you see, what we learn, we can practice, and the more we practice it, the better we are at it. And that's true for sports, that's true for how we write, how we use the computer. All of those things can help us to be a better practitioner of whatever it is we're studying. So the final picture on this particular slide says that practice makes perfect. And that's true with making the right decisions. If we learn to make the right decisions and we practice that, we'll get better at it. Yes, we're going to have to make some bad decisions, and that's not great, but it is life. We learn from our mistakes, and if you do learn from your mistakes, then you'll not make those mistakes again. There may be many, many methods for ethical decision making. I have focused on 2 here on this slide. One is called the consequentialist approach. That's a big word. It's a tough word, but you get the root word in there, consequence, and that'll kind of trigger your mind to think about what this approach does. Basically, a consequentialist approach in decision making, a person will analyze the situation and think of all the possible outcomes that could happen as a result of the decision. They think of all the consequences that could happen if they choose option A, what might happen, option B, option C. So they're looking at the what if. Now, this particular model requires a lot of information because you have to know the what if I choose option A or I choose option B. What's the good that's going to happen? What's the bad that's going to happen? The second approach is called the ultimate good. Now, some texts will say that this is a non-consequentialist approach. I call it the ultimate good because I want you to remember that the focus of the non-consequentialist, or the ultimate good, is how can I increase pleasure and or the good for people within my organization. So when I make decisions, I make them in terms of how this decision is going to make somebody else's life better and ultimately achieve that good out there in the distance. And that ultimate good is what makes the person happy, but also what makes them fulfilled, what empowers them. All of those things are part of that ultimate good. And then a person who follows this particular decision-making model then tries to make decisions that help to increase the benefits that the people within the organization receive. And they try to decrease the harm to individuals within the organization. Let's look at how each of these models works. On this particular slide, number 9, you'll see the consequentialist approach. It begins with an analysis of the problem. And we look at the problem, and from our analysis, we create or develop options to resolve the issue, to come up with the decision. We come up with options. And as we do, we start to think about the consequences. If I take option number 1, what's going to happen? If I take option 2 or 3, what's going to happen? And so I've listed here just some options out and consequences around the options. And the way we make our decision is we rank the options in terms of the option that has the fewest number of negative consequences. Because every option has a consequence. And some are positive, but many of them are negative options. And what we're trying to do with this approach is to find the option that has the most positive consequences, positive outcomes, and the fewest number of negative outcomes. And when we find that one, we latch onto it and we implement it. And this model also uses a code of ethics. We choose options because we have a personal code of ethics, and our code is what guides us, or a professional code or a religious code that guides us in creating the options as well as selecting the option that we would implement and use. The second model, I guess is the word I'm using here, is called the ultimate good. And basically, you analyze the problem, but you do so in terms of how can I increase the positive aspects of this working environment. How can I increase the benefits to my subordinates by making a certain decision? And so what they will do, they who follow this particular model of decision making, is that they will come up with options. And let's say that the red arrow here represents good. And it's a continuum. The least amount of good is on the bottom end, and the most amount of good is at the tip of that arrow. And we see 3 options here.
and each option increases the good over the preceding option. So option 1 is better than option 0, and option 2 is better than 1, and option 3 is better than 2 or 1. It is the best option because it increases the most good. So the way this model works is we choose the option that brings the most good to the greatest number of people, and that's the one that we choose. Unfortunately, both of these particular models have some weaknesses. They have some deficiencies that we have to talk about. And I've used what you see here on the slide number 11. I've used a caduceus as a symbol to kind of represent these two models. So we're looking at the left-hand side of the caduceus, and there's the little snake there. Let's let that snake represent the consequentialist approach. The problem that many people find in the consequentialist approach, the biggest, the overarching problem, and there may be many, but here's the overarching problem, is we cannot predict all of the consequences that may happen as a result of our actions, because consequences have a way of multiplying. And because we do not have the information, and we don't have a crystal ball that we can look into to get that information, many times we have to make decisions without full knowledge. Well, the consequentialist method doesn't work well when there isn't a full amount of knowledge, or the person making the decision doesn't have access to a large bank of information. So it has a deficit there because, again, there are times that you just have to make a decision between two options, and you don't know that hidden consequence that's going to happen as a result of your decision. It's called the unintended consequence. So that's a major weakness with this particular model. But the ultimate good has several issues that make it maybe not the best model either. Because with this particular model, who gets to determine what is good? How do we define what is good? Everybody has an idea of what good means. And so one of the challenges then is the person making the decision is imposing his or her idea of goodness on a large number of people. And it may not necessarily be good. And because it's not good for everybody, there are some people who may be harmed as a result of the decision. You know, there's a winner and there's a loser. And those losers in the decision, the one who doesn't get picked, they may suffer. And in this ultimate good, that's acceptable because the goal is the greatest number of people that experience the good. That's the decision that you make. So then I ask the question, what about fairness? Because everybody deserves to be treated equitably. They deserve to be treated fairly. So there's a major weakness with the ultimate good. So what I suggest is a third option. Even though it's called the ultimate good, it also has several weaknesses which may make it by itself not a good decision-making model. So when we think about the right side of the caduceus here, and that's the ultimate good, the question that comes to mind first, or should come to mind first, is who determines the good? Who is in a place that has enough knowledge to make a decision that will be good for everyone or good for a large number of people? And what is their definition of good? Because every one of us has a different definition of the good, or consider the good life. So that's a problem where it's very subjective. It's not easy to come up with an answer to what is good for a school, what's good for the most people. That's what makes it hard, because also it lacks a lot of information in order to make that decision. Secondly, the idea of the ultimate good is that we're supposed to bring the largest number of people the most good. Well, that means at its very heart that there are some people who are going to get left out. In other words, it will be good for some people, not so good for others. What about them? Are they less than valuable? Are they not as worthy as other people because they don't get to experience the good that they think should happen? So, what about fairness? Should we be fair? Well, I think so. Equitable? Yes, I think so. So this has a problem that many people say, well, we can't use the ultimate good or the non-consequentialist model because, again, we don't know what the good is. We don't know how it's going to impact others, and if it's going to impact them negatively, then what about their fairness, and are they going to be treated like they should? The third option, I think, is a better way, and that's to bring the caduceus together. And that's to blend both the consequentialist and the ultimate good together. And what joins them in the center, that post, that staff with the round orb on the top, is the code of ethics. So that when we make decisions as an ethical leader, we should consider the consequences. That's only fair, that's only right. What is going to be the impact of our decision on the students, on the parents, on the teachers, on the school? But then, we should also make decisions that do the most good for the most people. And that's where it becomes a balancing act in making a decision. Because sometimes you will have to make the decision between two options that are both good. And when you come to those places, this model that's combined really is helpful. Because when you have two equally, and you're not always going to have two options that are of equal value or equal good. So then you start to think of the consequences that might happen as a result. And then you can pick the option that does the most good and has the least number of bad consequences. So that at least you are making a decision that's fair, but also you are making a decision that is intended to increase the benefits to as many people as you possibly can increase. So this, I think, is a better way to make ethical decisions. And this brings us to the end of my very brief presentation here. I hope that you will try this third option that I've given you, the better way, which is to bring both consequentialist and ultimate good together in one model. Again, you can contact me at Troy University. Here's my email address. My picture's on this particular slide, so if you want to take a picture with me, you can. And certainly, if you have questions about the presentation, feel free to contact me at this email address, and I'll respond as soon as I can. I also ask that you don't send me the joke of the day or all of these pictures to this particular website, this particular email address. It is my work email address. So, this is where you want to contact me if you have questions. I'm on Facebook, and I do check it periodically. If you want to invite me to link to your page or send me a friend request, remember that you must, in your friend request, indicate that you were at a PPLVD, Philippine Professional Linkages from Various Disciplines Incorporated conference Otherwise, I don't accept friend requests from people I don't know. So if you'll mention that in your invitation, that'll let me know this is someone that has heard me speak. So I look forward to hearing from you and look forward to an opportunity to see you at a future conference. Professional development is important for leaders, it's important for teachers, and I encourage you to do that, get as much professional learning as you can to improve your skill as a leader, improve your skill in the classroom. And if you'll talk to the people from PPLVD, you will find them to be very, very helpful, and they will make sure that you get all of the training that you need. So take care. There is going to be a workshop that follows this session here. So I'm going to turn the presentation off at this time so that you can see my face next.
Okay, now you can see me again. And we have finished that little short session on ethical decision making. So let's talk about what you can do to practice that skill. First of all, what I'd like you to do is to talk with your partner about the professional ethics that govern school leaders in the Philippines. What kinds of things are the DepEd officials expecting of school leaders, the way they expect you to behave? How can that professional code of ethics guide you in making decisions that are good for your school, good for the people in them, but also resolve issues? That's what I want you to talk about with your partner, and then share those with Dr. Cayo. I think she'll lead this session on my behalf since I'm not going to be able to be there. So let's take a few minutes to discuss those professional standards that guide school leaders in the Philippines and how those standards can help us to make ethical decisions and do so to help our teachers to be the best that they can be in the classroom. Take care now.